This is the Bush Whisperer here, coming at you from the beautiful penguin sanctuary. Can you see her 2 eggs there? I think you can. She's sitting on her 2 eggs, enjoying herself. This is Penguin Sanctuary, Boulders Beach, southern tip of Africa, Cape Town. Of course, this is the Bush Whisperer here. Hope you're having a terrific day. I've come to talk to you today about why it is that we find that we want to lose ourselves in the fantasies. And fantasies are important. Fantasies, fundamentally, from a shamanic perspective, are the raw currency of dream time and the way in which dream time can be directly affected, programmed, if you will. And so fantasies are the sphere of the middle world, essentially, as they operate between the upper and lower of the 3 shamanic spheres. And so are a profoundly effective way of changing the world we live in and changing our own perceptions and emotional states, and our inner states are calibrated. So fantasies are an important part of the human experience, believe it or not. And we can't help fantasizing. And I don't believe it's necessarily healthy or important to stop fantasizing. Though fantasies shouldn't be left to run wild. And as a man, you know, it's very easy to fantasize about a woman that you find attractive. As a man, I'm sure many men have been out there. Women also, I'm sure, find it easy to fantasize about a man they find attractive. Sexually, that is. So fantasies often do relate to sexuality and can have a huge, powerful sexual energy attached to them. And so they do relate to the sphere of the moon. From a Kabbalistic perspective, you would say it's Yeshut, the fantasies. From a Vedic perspective, you would say that it's a sphere of the moon. And the sphere of the moon is acting through from between Svadhisthana to Muladhara chakra. The way in which this receiving polarity of the lunar flow. Because understand that the causal principle is moving through Mars. Though Mars touches the moon. I want you to consider that for a moment. The outer face of Mars touches the inner face of moon, in a way. So the moon is the sphere of sublimation. It is the sphere of being able to dive deep into the sublime things that aren't necessarily rational. And so lunar energy can be considered irrational. This is why we call people lunatics. When they have a very big dose of lunar energy without enough sun's energy to balance that. For the sun's energy is a totally rational electric universe, producing rational clarity of thinking and perspective, where the moon will produce revelations from the sublime thoughts that operate in a very illogical way, shall we say. So it's fundamental to understand how the intuition works, and to understand and grasp the principles and process of the intuition is to grasp how the sublimation works in the human psyche. So what can we say about the nature of this experience? The entire reality is one big fantasy. I recently did a video about dream time and about what dreams are. And it ties into this, as does another video I did about the Matrix. It's a slightly older video. And how the basis of this reality is essentially a big dream. If you want to consider that, it's a series of fantasies that are bound, correlating. So there has to be correlation between the fantasies in order for it to become reality. And the correlation between these fantasies, we call this temporal alignment, if you really want to, time. And the temporal alignment of these fantasies creates a subsequent causal flow, that one flows from the other. And there's a logic to the processing of these informations, or these memories, which are essentially fantasies created by the human psyche in order to produce this reality. So fantasies program reality. It's a big part of the occult practices. It's a big part of magic. Being able to work in dream time is a big part of the training for those practicing various different occult practices. Manifestation is driven by fantasies. And this is why the Kundalini is so central to the development of the yogi, or the Kundalini yogi. And in the Greek process, the Christos, which is the refined Kundalini, if you really want to get right down to it, what they call the anointed oil, as it travels up the spine, is how this is actually working through the body, hormonally, which carry the etheric substances, and the astral template that moves upon this, and the electrical impulses, which is how the etheric finds expression into the human psyche and consciousness, producing the electrical effects in the body that mirror the electrical effects of the sun in reality. And so fantasies are a very powerful doorway into the sublime. Fantasies are a great way to enter into your sublimating process of your psyche. Though one should learn to fantasize objectively. What do I mean by objective fantasizing? One should learn to choose what one fantasizes about. Beautiful little penguin here. Hey, look at you. Your little head. Oh, they're so beautiful. So if we learn to choose our fantasies carefully. Sorry, I had to take a top from my son because he dirties all these clean clothes every time he comes out here and he looks like a mess. I had to put it around my waist. So the conscious control of these fantasies helps one to learn to focus this ray, the ray of consciousness, which is essentially the vehicle of manifestation. And those of you that want to learn to manifest, you need to learn to control your fantasies. It's a big part of the program. They don't teach you that in the manifestation videos, which are part of the self-help scene, do they? They don't explain the relevance because, well, the truth is they don't know. You know, people have all had some experiences of manifestation and they didn't really fully appreciate and understand everything that was happening in the process because probably they weren't trained from the bottom up. Probably they had innate experiences, innate abilities, and they triggered, and so they're trying to share with you their experiences, and they give you bits and pieces that are useful, but they miss the cohesive structure of how things work. In the same way that you might have a little bit of experience with plumbing, but if you weren't trained as a plumber, if you didn't go to plumbing school, there's going to be a lot you don't know about how plumbing works. That's just how this is. Same for computer coding. You might figure out a little bit about how computer coding works, but if you actually go and be trained as a computer coder from the ground up, through all the processes of training, you'll become a proper computer coder and you'll understand coding from every different aspect, essentially. So in the same way, the manifestation power moves through this ability to fantasize and to create these powerful fantasies in our psyche can be a very empowering way of changing your state of mind and driving your growth. I'll give you an example in the way in which these fantasies would be used. Imagine yourself with the qualities you would like to have. And then imagine yourself exhibiting these qualities. So let's say you feel you're not brave enough and you wish you were more brave. Then you would fantasize yourself being in a dangerous situation. And you would, in this fantasy, imagine yourself being brave enough to overcome the situation. If you're afraid of heights, you would fantasize that you're in a high place. And in your fantasy, you would be learning to cope with being in a high place. And you would be okay about it. You would be gaining control over your emotions. Or it could be that you wish to develop more compassion. And you would imagine yourself in a situation where someone else has done something to you that's not pleasant. And that you are in that state, feeling compassion, becoming the person that you wish you were in your fantasies. And if you do this objectively and consciously, then you will slowly, by and by, start to develop these qualities. And the same can be said by imagining the way you want your world to be, fantasizing about how you want your life to live, Fantasizing, I mean, if you're going to spend your time fantasizing about money, that can't necessarily always be the good thing. But it will attract money to you. If you, in your fantasies, are handling a lot of money, then the money will be flowing through your hands in the physical plane. So this is how fantasies actually do. And I wouldn't suggest fantasizing about money, because there's a price to pay for everything that we attach to our psyche. One can develop greed if one has the wrong fantasies. Let's say you fantasize about having sex with women all the time. You can develop a sexual dysfunction. You can develop emotional problems, inability to open up, and then when you do finally have sex with a woman, you might not be able to please her. And then you would be, well, effectively useless because of your fantasies. So it's important to be able to know what fantasies are powerful and constructive and which fantasies are toxically, potentially dangerous. And so this is why we do need to be able to control our fantasies. It's very, very important. Many of you that struggle with sexual fantasies will understand exactly what I'm talking about, because they can be very debilitating, they can be very unhealthy. You know, if you are stuck in a pattern of fantasizing that isn't healthy. And some fantasies can create problems. Some fantasies can bring about positive change. So I would say pay attention to your fantasies. Watch yourself when you start slipping off into a fantasy. Observe what fantasy it is. And come back and have a diary. Write about your fantasy. Write about what it is you were desiring, how it made you feel before, during, and after, and how you were affected after the fantasizing in your life. What kind of experiences were following, and how the pattern of your life brings you back to particular fantasies. And observe the way fantasies affect you, and start to consciously choose which fantasies you will or will not allow. And don't allow yourself to just fantasize any old time of day. Choose when you want to fantasize, so that you can learn to close the book on fantasies if you need to, and open the book on fantasies if you desire to. Gaining that sense of self-control over the fantasies is a big part of the training. So I hope this is useful. If you think so, like it and share it. And always be aware of why you're fantasizing would be probably one of the more important things to consider here. What is the bottom line? Because very often we have fantasies because we feel ineffectual in the physical plane. So we're trying to compensate. Many fantasies are a form of psychological compensation for an inner sense of undervaluing of the self or feeling not good enough. So we will often in our fantasies try to compensate for our inhibitions or what we consider our lack in life, the physical plane. So we can learn a lot about ourselves by observing those fantasies that come to us. And very often fantasies might come and we might not even notice they're there. So start paying attention to your fantasies. Start becoming conscious. Your dreams are also fantasies. Realize that. They are the fantasies that you experience when you're not conscious. And yes, you can gain control over those fantasies too. Men that have wet dreams, you don't need to. You can stop wet dreams at will. You just need to learn how. Learn to control your fantasies. Learn to get an insight into how your fantasies work. And you might find yourself trying to have a wet dream in the night and stop yourself in your sleep. There's something to consider. You won't lose the chi. You won't lose the life force. For when a man ejaculates, he loses life force. And this should be a conscious thing. You should be consciously aware and able to choose whether we do this or not. So I hope this has been enlightening to you. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If I'm shivering at all, it's because I am pretty cold and my hands are turning blue. Even though it's warm, I'm going to go walk out in the sun now. The sun's quite bright for videos. So have an absolutely gorgeous day. Subscribe. There are daily uploads. You don't want to miss the uploads as they come. Hit that little bell. It should be coming up on the right hand side. And don't forget that life is a continual journey, and that this journey is essentially our fantasies manifesting ourselves. And that even what we think of as ourselves, who we are in this life, wow, the sun is bright, that's beautiful. is essentially a fantasy. Start to recognize that you are your fantasy, you are the creation of your fantasies, and that everything that we think we are in life is just a dream. For life is a dream, and this dream is a journey through dream time. This is the Bush Whisperer coming at you from the most beautiful penguin sanctuary in the whole world. Have a totally gorgeous day. Om Shanti.